Here we go. Okay, good morning. Thank you for being with us today. And I especially want to thank Christine. Make sure I say your last name correctly.
It's Nobbe, Christine
Nobbe.
Nobbe.
Okay, so thank you, Christine Nobbe, for being with us today from DESE to give some updates on and some information on gifted education. So Christine, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you for having me. I'm always delighted to share information about gifted education in Missouri. So, if you all have parent meetings where you need a speaker, I'm all there for you. Or if you're doing professional learning with teachers and you need someone to come in, I would be glad to participate because I'm always up for talking about gifted education. So, one thing I wanted to mention right up front is one way to stay involved and knowledgeable about what's happening in Missouri is to join our listserv. So, if you've got your phone, you can, open up that camera, point at that little QR code, and then there should be a little yellow, well, my phone, there's a little yellow list.mo.gov, and I click on that, and that takes to the listserv. Now, I have been told that my listserv is excellent. I probably should get some kind of, like Pulitzer Prize for it. So please join. And I'm very good about the subject line. So if you see a subject line that just doesn't connect with you, just delete it. All right. So there's my little plug for my listserv. At DESE, this is our vision and mission statement, and gifted education is definitely improving lives through education and providing access to opportunity. Today, as I'm sharing some new information with you, here's another opportunity for you to get involved. Senate Bill 681 was passed in the spring and signed into law by the governor, and there is some new gifted language in that law, which will be in effect in the school year 24-25. And so we are going to need to go through that rule regulation process again. And so I'm getting started with that, asking you to give me some input on things that we should be doing differently going forward. So again, if you'll grab that website, pay, that link and follow instructions and give me some feedback. I would love it. I'm going to keep it open through November because then in December, I've got to get busy on actually starting to write new rule and new gifted education program guidelines. All right, so the two great opportunities for you to participate and share your ideas. Share your ideas in one and just to keep up with what's going on. All right, so this is not new, but I wanted to provide a little bit of background about gifted education in Missouri. So gifted education in Missouri by state statute began at about 1973 when the state statute defined who is a gifted learner. I think on the next slide, I have the actual language. And then on this slide, I try to bullet out so you can see the key points. So in Missouri, gifted students are learners who exhibit precocious capacity and learning potential, are identified by competent professionals, and need an academic environment beyond standard grade level curriculum. So this statute really does drive a lot of what we do in gifted education. Now, there is an additional statute that provides more information. We can get into that a little bit and just a little bit more. But based on that definition about precocious capacity and learning potential, we also can think about, characteristics of gifted learners. So when we're looking for kiddos, what are we looking for? This particular list, and you can Google it, characteristics of gifted learners, and you'll find lists and lists and lists of characteristics that are developed by different people at different times. So this is a meta-analysis of data that was done in the mid-1990s. So they looked through all of the information about, what people are saying about gifted learners and developed these 10 characteristics. And they have really stood the test of time. I've got a link down there, two links. One is the original document where this comes from, and then another document that I have created that is connected to this called MOTABs. So these 10 characteristics, not all gifted kids show every characteristic. One thing that's really interesting about the way like this has been developed over time is that people have made lists of, okay, so what does humor look like in a positive way in the classroom? But then what does humor look like that can be challenging in the classroom? So my favorite one to think about is, is communication, right? So communication, some of the kids are highly expressive with words and it comes out beautifully in poetry. And that's a positive. And then the negative is they're never quiet. They talk all the time. You can't get them to stop talking. And so we have to recognize that these characteristics can be a positive influence in the individual, the child. At the same time, there can be some behaviors that can be a little difficult to deal with too. My personal favorite when I'm working with gifted kids, my personal favorite characteristic is insight, where you're teaching a concept, you're talking about something that the kiddo gets it really quickly, connects it to other things in that they know about, and puts things together and has this aha moment and has something to share that is really interesting and exciting. It also can take the conversation a different direction than what you intended in your presentation, your discussion. So I imagine as I've been talking, you've probably been reading these 10 characteristics. I do want to mention really briefly about the MOTABs. So these 10 characteristics can be used to help identify students. And the MOTABs is, because this is public domain work, the MOTABs is something that you can access and use as part of an identification process. I am sure it's going to be very hard to write down that link. So please reach out to me. We'll make sure we give contact information, but one of my contacts that's easy to use because it's easy to remember is giftededucation@dese.mo.gov. And then, because my name's might be challenging to spell, but we'll get back to that. Another characteristics that I've got to mention about gifted learners, it's so important that everyone remembers this. Gifted kids experience asynchronous development. They develop unevenly across domains. They are not gifted in everything. Now, there are times when you feel like, oh my gosh, this kiddo is just amazing. They can do everything, but they're just not. Kids have strengths and weaknesses, including gifted kids. So here's an example of that asynchronous development as a good way to look at it. So there's this ring of a chronological age here in this image, a black circle. So let's pretend that's a 7-year-old. So I taught second grade gifted kids for a long time. So a 7-year-old typically in the classroom doesn't cry, right? Kindergartners cry a lot. 7-year-olds, second graders don't cry often. But it is possible that a gifted kiddo might be a little bit delayed emotionally or is very sensitive emotionally, and in a classroom may experience times of crying that maybe you don't expect to see a 7-year-old. But at the same time, has amazing academic or has amazing verbal abilities, and given an opportunity, they can express exactly why they're crying. They just can't control those tears. So kids have strengths and weaknesses, and one thing is they're not always strong in both reading and math and science and all these different academic areas. So in identifying gifted kiddos, we do want to recognize that and accept students into the gifted program who are strong in one area, for example, math, but maybe average, typical of that age level in another area, or possibly even have a disability in an area. So gifted students can be twice exceptional, so they can be gifted and have a specific learning disability, for example. My experience with gifted students were that I had a lot of gifted kids who were gifted and autistic. And many of those also were very, very strong in math. But in the reading, writing, well, reading, grade level, a little bit above. Writing, like both the physical motor writing and getting words on paper or on a computer would be delayed. So just wanted to kind of point that out. And then another little bit of background information before we kind of get into some new things is that people often are thinking ahead, like we don't have a gifted program. We're wondering what we have to do. And so this is kind of a summary of, hey, this is what a gifted program, this is what it is, and this is how you can go about, creating a new one. If you already have a gifted program, you might want to, check your email for a moment. All right, so gifted program starts with a gifted certified teacher. Okay, that's under current state statute. In 24-25, the law is going to change, and the law will say if you are a small district with ADA, average daily attendance of 350 or fewer, the teacher does not need to be certified, but instead can participate in 6 clock hours of professional learning about gifted education and gifted students per year. So currently, all teachers in Missouri that provide services are gifted certified. Go in 24-25, the change is going to be gifted certification is not required in small districts, 350 or fewer students. But I realize that, but still, the districts that are larger than 350 would have a certified teacher. Our current rule and gifted education program guidelines say that there's a minimum of 150 minutes per week. And that is the K-8. High school is a little bit different because you can use the gifted resource teacher model. And that gifted resource teacher model is when the teacher is at the high school for 150 minutes per week available to students, but they don't have to have a class of kids. So think they're not counselors, but think about the way a counselor works, right? They have an office. They have certain things that they're working on. They work with small groups with kids. They do one-on-one counseling. Maybe they go into a whole entire class to, I don't know, to talk about whatever, So the gifted resource teacher at the high school level is available to the students. I always say start with identifying kids to attend Missouri Scholars Academy and Missouri Fine Arts Academy. And once you get going on that, then you'll find plenty of other things to do to work with students. We have really good evidence that providing services at the high school level to gifted students does increase ACT scores. It increases the amount of time students are in school. We're able to meet their needs better if we provide services. Those other program models, the RRT is the resource room teacher, where the kiddos walk down the hall to the resource room. SCT is a special class teacher used mostly at middle school, where gifted may be like an assigned class. First period is math, second period is gifted, and then we have ELA. And then PEGS is the exceptionally gifted. And we have several PEGS programs around the state. So reach out if you want to know more information about that. So gifted program basics, everybody has to have an identification process, right? Well, we have guidance on that, a little bit more on that later if we have time. Then also the next one is that if you have a gifted program, the school develops program goals, learner outcomes, and activities beyond standard curriculum. So DESE does not provide that curriculum. It's developed at the school level. There is an annual program evaluation that's not turned in. It's for you all to figure out how to grow your program, make it stronger and better. There is data that is provided to DESE through Core Data and MOSIS. So in August, you give us a little snapshot of your identification process. in October, you tell us what teachers are teaching in the gifted program and what students are being served in the gifted program. And that's done through, core data and MOSES. You don't actually send me a file. All right, so that's a little bit of the basics. And if you don't have a gifted program and you're like, whoa, she went through that really fast, reach out. But also, I would encourage you to look at the gifted education program guidelines that is on the DESE gifted education page. The guidelines spell out what all the expectations. Okay. So that brings me to another opportunity for you to snap a little click on a Padlet. And what I did on this Padlet is I tried to highlight some of the new things that are happening in the gifted education program guidelines. So if you have a gifted program and you haven't looked at the website recently, you may not realize that there are new gifted education program guidelines. They came out on May 30th, and that had to do with a 5-year review of the rules and regulations. It's just a part of government process. The big differences, and I can say I highlighted it in this Padlet, but I'll mention a couple of the big differences. One big difference is that we changed the identification so that if you are a rural or a small school, you can write an alternative identification plan. So in the guidelines, there are guidelines for what I call traditional identification of gifted learners. For decades, there has been this opportunity to write an alternative identification plan for traditionally underrepresented groups of students. So if your district has a big bubble of English language learners, and you're noticing that the English language learners are not represented in your gifted program, you can write an alternative plan to focus and find those kiddos. So you might think of it as a targeted plan. We're targeting a group of kiddos that we're missing in our gifted program. Another group might be free and reduced lunch, or it might be African-American students, Hispanic students. So though that has been around for decades, now the alternative plan, it says, hey, if you're a rural or small school, you can also write an alternative plan, because if you look at Missouri, we are most underrepresented in rural and small schools. Most of the kids that we're not serving are from rural schools, and actually are students who identify as white. So that's kind of interesting. So anyway, that's a little one of the big changes in the gifted education program guidelines. So I recommend that you go to the Padlet, because I kind of outlined some of the other changes that you might be interested in reading about. Now that gifted education program guideline is so fascinating to read. I would definitely recommend reading it cover to cover. That was kind of a joke. All right. Other new things. This is one I'm so excited to share with you. This is on the DESE gifted education page. So, dese.mo.gov, press spacebar, right? Gifted education, and Google will help you find the page. And this came about because we have an advisory council on the education of gifted and talented children. And they present to the State Board of Education every 2 years. And so back in 2015, they had this long list of things they thought that DESE should do. And we've been working on it, right? So this past, so it was October of 2021 when the council presented. One of the State Board of Education members said, have you all ever thought about doing a portrait of a gifted learner, kind of like a portrait of a graduate? Well, no, we hadn't, but okay. So we got busy on it. And it was, first of all, a really fascinating process. I took the lead on this, and the council provided advice and advisory period and they had one representative on the committee. So I ended up doing virtual exploratory meetings, hearing from parents, teachers, administrators, counselors about basically I used two questions. One was, what are your hopes and dreams for your gifted kids? And then secondly, what skills do you think they need so that those hopes and dreams can come true? And what really kind of came out in the discussions is that the parents want their kids to, be happy, do something productive in society, do something that they enjoy doing. But a lot of the focus really was on their social emotional needs. Teachers focused a little bit more on critical thinking, problem solving, creative thinking, using these skills so that they can impact the future in a positive way. So after months of work, this portrait of a gifted learner is our final product. And I'm hoping that people will be able to use this to build on for their gifted program. If you're starting a brand new gifted program, you might look at this portrait and say, boy, it looks like maybe it would be a good idea for our program to focus on complex reasoning. That seems to be, top importance. Yeah, creative thinking looks pretty important too. Oh my, I see a lot of things that have to do with social emotional development. So obviously we need, social emotional curriculum. Oh, communication. Oh, communication here is just a little bit different than Missouri learning standards. It's a little bit different focus. Okay, that's interesting. And then, global mindedness, right? Because gifted kids are likely to grow up to be doing things that are going to impact our state, our country, our world. Okay, so that's the portrait of a gifted learner. And then I am gonna slide through a couple of slides here because I had some ideas to talk about that, but I know we have, always have limited time. So another day. It was a test to see if you could remember the icons. Okay. Then the other thing that we worked on were the Missouri Gifted Learner Outcomes. Now, this is really fascinating in that I actually started this project when I first came to DESE. I had a lot of people reaching out saying, we're trying to revise our gifted program. We really need some learning like standards for gifted. Okay, can you work on that? And I got started on it in September of 2019. Our goal was to have it finished in the summer of 2020. The pandemic hit. We had some dates scheduled to work in April of 2020, and we couldn't meet. We were planning on meeting for like 3 days. And then in the summer of 2020, we did actually, there was a group of people. So I started out with about 40 people, and then about 20 that wanted to work on these Missouri Gifted Learner Outcomes. And we worked on it some in the summer of 2020, but that was kind of a weird time. And then the summer of 2021, we really made great progress with it. So then what happened, then remember we developed this portrait, right? So here again are the key ideas on the portrait. And our gifted learner outcomes that we had developed pre-portrait were good. They really were these ideas, but they were worded a little bit differently. Like we actually called one part of the portrait one part of the MOGLOs, we called it social emotional learning. So now we have this portrait. So we actually then went through. So the summer of 2022 was a very busy summer for me. We created the portrait, we rewrote the MOGLOs, and have it published on the DESE website. So those MOGLOs are awesome, and they are optional. You can adapt and adopt to them. You can just adopt to them. You can take little pieces of it and use it. So this is a screenshot of the first page. And this briefly outlines the big idea of the MOGLOs. So if you look at, so I can read a sentence here. As you're planning your gifted education program, you can use Missouri Learning Standards in core content, computer science, and fine arts, but the unique academic, social, and emotional needs of gifted learners are addressed through the Missouri Gifted Learner Outcomes. The MOGLOs can also guide gifted education specialists as they develop learner outcomes for their gifted program. And we decided to focus on 3 of the 6 domains: complex reasoning, creative thinking, and affective processing. Then we took the other areas: global mindedness, communicating effectively, and executive functioning, and embedded those into the complex reasoning, creative thinking, and affective processing. So this is just the first page, and then the next pages outline the Missouri Gifted Learner Outcomes in grade spans K2, 3, 5, 6, 8, and 9, 12. And like I say, this will help explain. Remember that the MOGLOs focus on complex reasoning, creative thinking, affective processing. The others are embedded, and we use those icons that you saw in the portrait to help you discover where we did the embedding. Okay, so I take a look at it. It's about, I think it's 13 pages. And you are welcome to use the entire document. You're welcome to copy and paste things. You're welcome to take it and make edits. It's for you to use. Now, each of the domains, we start with a big idea to explain, like, this is what this domain is all about. We have enduring understandings, essential questions, and then grade span outcomes. And then at the end of each section, there's also a connection to the National Association for Gifted Children, their programming standards. So currently in Missouri, some districts are actually using like the NAGC programming standards to help them. So I wanted to show that connection. But you're not required to use NAGC programming standards, but we wanted to create that connection for people. So that's the MOGLOs, and I'm, hoping that they'll benefit districts as they're making changes, developing new programs, moving forward. If you notice things that you think should be changed in the MOGLOs, it's a living, breathing document. Please let me know. I won't make any huge changes without, a committee to determine. But if you notice something, a typo or, maybe a word that would be more clear, just let me know. And because I'm trying to make sure that this is something that's beneficial, as we got started on this project because teachers said, hey, we need this information. All right, so and then the what's next. So with the MOGLOs, there are some ideas for how we can build this out and develop additional things that will help school systems. And one that I really want to focus on first is documenting growth. I do think that some of the school districts that are going to use the MOGLOs will start working on some of the things like the kid-friendly, like if I look at the essential questions, some of those are not very kid-friendly. It might be better to change those a little bit, for the K2 group. And I can see that teachers would probably be working on that. I know that some people are going to be working on things like rubrics using the MOGLOs. But one of the things I really want to focus on is documenting growth over time. So that is something that's always coming up about gifted education is what is the benefit? And whenever we whenever the council, the Gifted Advisory Council, talks to the State Board of Education, they're always prepared with some new evidence, because it's always the question, how do we know the gifted program is important? So I'm looking for some ways to to document growth over time, and for kids to document their growth. And one idea that has come up is creating some what we were, well, one of the districts calls it messy situations. So for kids to actually show that they're developing in critical thinking, and, well, we're calling it complex reasoning. In complex reasoning and creative thinking, is to provide them with this messy situation, right? There's a scenario, and then let them figure out how to solve that problem, so that they're using all of that critical thinking, problem solving, creative thinking, and they're sharing their ideas, either written or verbally. So there's the creative expression as well. So that's the MOGLOs, and remember, these are on the DESE Gifted Education web page, and I hope you'll have an opportunity to dig in and look at them, and let me know if you need some support, and if you see anything that you want to tell me I should change, let me know about that too. All right, so that is kind of some of the new things. It's 10:34. I'm wondering if we should take a few minutes just to talk about identifying gifted students, because this seems to be the thing that people worry about the most. This is the area that is causing some of the like, we get those kiddos in the classroom, we have so much fun teaching and learning, and that's the easy peasy part. The hard part is trying to find those kids. So if we have time, we'll kind of jump into that for just a little bit, okay? So first, I want to talk to you a little bit about the traditional method, and give you plenty of things to go learn more about, right? So the traditional method is to collect data in 4 areas. So we're looking at general mental ability, academic achievement. The third area is 3 things: creativity, reasoning, and or problem solving, and then other evidence of gifts and talents. So the general mental ability, Missouri has really been big on using the WISC. Well, we started out with the WISC 3 and then the WISC 4, and now we're on the WISC 5. But I just want to mention that you do not have to use that test to identify gifted students. And there are really great tests out there, not just the WISC 5. The WISC 4, when that was developed, the Pearson completely changed that test. Not completely, but made a lot of big changes. And the WISC 4 and the WISC 5, the full scale score is really actually not the best score to use to identify gifted students. There's too much of a focus on processing speed. Some gifted kids process really quickly and then spend the next 10 minutes rethinking everything. And also on, okay, I just forgot what the other one is besides processing speed, but okay, well, it'll come to me. So if you're using the WISC 5 and you're still using the full scale scores, reach out to me, because we got a better plan for you. And if you're like, we can't give the WISC 5 anymore and we're not sure what to give, reach out. There are a lot of excellent tests that are available. Academic achievement, our guidelines, the traditional method says that you're using 95th percentile on a nationally normed instrument. And we'll talk about an alternative plan, how you could change that. There are various assessments that are available for creativity, reasoning, and problem solving. Our gifted education program guidelines, there is a list of frequently used tests that lists some of them. So You can look there. And then the other, could be MAP scores, but you may already have that covered in the academic achievement. You might have your gifted educator do an observation, complete the MOTABs. If you are having general education teachers and parents do some kind of a rating as part of the identification process, got to be careful with that. You might need to educate. Well, you definitely need to educate your general education teachers about identifying before they do rating scales. And parent ratings can be challenging for some parents because they may, like, for example, if they're Spanish speaking, are you going to provide it in Spanish, or how are you going to how are you going to do that? So be cautious when you're using rating scales. All right, so that's a traditional method, right? So we're collecting evidence in these 4 areas. We have some pretty clear guidelines on what are the cutoff scores, but oh yeah, I've talked about this already. But many people are writing an alternative identification plan. And in that alternative identification plan, their goal is to be sure that all of their groups of students are represented in the gifted program. So whatever your demographic makeup is of your school system, you want your gifted program to look like the school. So one of the solutions to identifying traditionally underrepresented gifted students is to write an alternative plan. A little bit more on that. Another big idea is to universally screen all students at a given grade level, and possibly more than one grade level, but definitely a universal screening where you look at every single student, even, little so-and-so who is not gifted, because you just never know. So with that universal screening, some people are using data that they have on hand, through, benchmark testing. However, one of the best things you can do is to use some sort of general mental ability test as a screener. There are several just little short tests that give you a quick snapshot of general mental ability, and we can talk more about that. If you're unsure what you could use, just reach out to me. So we're losing my scarf here. We're looking at this universal screener, and then working through from there to collect that body of evidence. Remember those 4 areas. And we want to make sure that you've got a team of people looking at this data. If just one person, like the gifted education specialist that is also the teacher, it's just the only person looking at this data, I mean, it just doesn't make sense. I mean, you could make a mistake. With this one person, a little bit of bias can creep in. You need a team, and I recommend a team of 3 or more people. So, for example, if you're a small school system, your gifted education specialist, one of the counselors, one of the principals might be where you would go with your little team. Part of then the trying to identify students is to give more information to all teachers about gifted learners and what they look like, even those negative characteristics that might be annoying, and like, oh, that they might be doing that because they're gifted. Oh, I never thought about that. And then for equitable identification, we want to talk about writing an alternate plan and about using local norms rather than national norms. Okay. And that local norming is really important now, because we are seeing that kids, since 2019 are not scoring as well on tests. Look at the NAEP data that came out. Look at the MAP data that came out. Kids are not scoring as strongly on tests now as they did back in 2019. And so all of these tests that we're using the WISC-5 or, whatever you're using, all of those were developed pre-2019. So local norming is very useful. That's where, so then in local norming, you're comparing your students just to other students in your school system, not to the whole national picture. All right, so those are some ideas for that. And then the alternative plan, more and more districts are writing these. Now, remember, it started out as a way to target certain groups of students and make sure that they are identified and are in the gifted program. For example, if you have 50% of your students are on free and reduced lunch, then you would think that about 50% of your gifted students would also be on free and reduced lunch. And if you look at that data and realize that's not the case, you could write an alternative plan. Well, now remember, if you are a rural or a small school, you are welcome to write an alternative plan. Okay, so what is this alternative plan? Well, first you want to start with some data. Want to try to figure out what the problem is. So maybe the problem is, in 2018, we were serving 85 gifted students, and now in 2022, we're serving 55. What happened? What's going wrong? Is there something going on there? So that might be the start. And then have a purpose, have a goal in mind. We want to serve 7% of our student population. We want our gifted identified students to look like our bigger school, population. All right. So that would be the purpose. Then these alternate pathways are we go through a process, you and me, and agree on this alternate plan. And your plan that's written, because I do have to keep it on file. You would, of course, want to keep it on file too. You have data supporting the need for an alternative plan, a proposed plan, and rationale. Like instead of the WISC-5, we are, only I'm not wed to the WISC-5, but a lot of people are. It's been a thing that Missouri has used the WISC-5. So instead of using the WISC-5, we're going to start using the Kaufman Brief Intelligence Test because it is can be given more, more efficiently, and we can test more students. If we test more students, we're going to find more students, right? There's a rationale. The targeted participation goal, that would be how many students you really would like to be finding, to know that your goal is met. And then a timeline for implementing and evaluating progress. So I'm assuming that you will also want to work within your district to get approval for an alternative plan. So it depends on the district, right? Some people, it might be the special education director who can sign off. Other districts, it might be the superintendent. There may be school districts where that would be the school board, right? That is that's internal to the school district. Okay. So this alternative plan, another way of just pointing this out is that you want to start with data. You want to develop a committee to work through the plan, think through this from different perspectives, and then have some persistence with this because we're not going to solve this overnight. There have been districts who have been working on equitable identification of gifted kids since like 1990. Are still working on that. So I started teaching in Rockwood, and oh gosh, I guess it was 1992, and we had a big focus on identification and identifying all groups of students. And I retired from Rockwood, and they're still working on it. So it's something we have to be persistent about. And then I've got okay, so the alternative plan, I wanted to mention a little bit more about local norms, and that is the idea that on a test that you're looking at comparing the kids within the district. I always say that it helps to get your favorite math person in the room as you start working on this. There are some tests that you use that's built in. There's a report that's built in to provide that information. let's see, I wanted to also mention that as you're working on an alternative plan, you may want to seek out cost-effective instruments. So maybe a group administered test instead of a one-on-one test. There are different options out there. Yeah, so then achievement, more and more districts are using benchmark data instead of giving like a separate achievement test to kids. What else do I have on here? And then I even wrote out like a list of here's how you could approach it. And this is on the website. So if you can't find this, but the website is set up so that when you first look at the website, there's some information. There's the portrait of a gifted learner. There's a link to the MOGLOs. Then there's a map that shows which districts are providing services. And then below that are these tabs. They're green. And if you open them, there's stuff inside. So for example, this document is inside the tab about identifying traditionally underrepresented gifted students. All right. And oh, look at that. And then one of the things I wanted to mention, I got to wrap up, is that people contact me frequently with questions about data. And there's a lot of data in the tab called data. And it links you to public data that you can look at and share. And I better wrap that up here. We got some public data here, some more info, too much. And finally, I always put way more in a slideshow than we can possibly talk about. Here is my contact information. If you can't get this down quickly enough, you can also do gifted education at dese.mo.gov. All right, I think I went over time. I'm so sorry.
No, but a ton of great information. A few clarifying questions. I mean, I love
Okay.
it because I work from charter through public, right? And so some people haven't developed gifted programs.
Right.
Some of the charter schools I work. So I love how you walk through the whole continuum. One question I have is and I find it fascinating, all the different criteria and ways, and that you're offering this avenue, they can contact you, because it is just tricky territory on what assessments to use. One of the questions I have heard frequently from districts is, and teachers as well, so here's one of the most fascinating I found, how there can be this discrepancy that a student may not be very high achieving and all. They can be gifted in certain areas. As a classroom teacher, I helped a little kiddo get qualified because I could tell by his verbal, he was very gifted, but yet like your autistic kids, he couldn't write to save his life. So his kindergarten teachers thought I was crazy. I'm like, no, he's brilliant. Right. That they can have these. Yeah. I think that's fascinating reminder to teachers that his motor and fine motor ability had not caught up with right. So I think that very much impacts how we test kids and how we identify them. And so just advocating, what are things I know that classroom teachers are overwhelmed as general, but what are some of those key indicators so we can kind of pick out?
Yeah. So I would take us back to those 10 characteristics and be looking for examples. And that's actually what that MOTABS does. It helps you look for examples, with kids. So, kids who get your jokes, I mean, kids who laugh at your jokes might be gifted, right? Kids who are asking deeper questions that you don't know the answer to, right? Or are kids that are asking questions that you can't just Google the answer because it's so big picture, big thinking. So I think that we can,
but look at teachers are aware. So that's one thing administrators on this could do, would be to look at those, give maybe 20 minutes of staff time to look through some of those indicators and do anything come to mind. I think we just need to give space as a former leader. Sometimes this wasn't on our radar, and we need to make sure that teachers have time. The second thing is, what are your thoughts about, I know a lot of districts are using these general screeners, even for their K-2 of online, and then, for achievement, or even for some of the, you mentioned the WISC and all these different things, but what do you feel about districts who are using a computer test to do those things rather than a human. Because my
Yeah.
error for K-2 is like, what if they're not paying attention and they really are
Yeah.
gifted, they're not really qualifying? I wondered if you had thoughts on that.
Yeah. So one thing is that we always are trying to look for these multiple pathways, right? So with a universal screener that, for example, one universal screener that people are using is called the Naglieri Nonverbal Abilities Test, or the NNAT, NNAT. We're on the third edition, so it's NNAT 3. But anyway, that is a 30 minutes test that is done. Well, you can actually do a paper pencil, but the child does it by themselves. You don't sit with them, or they can do it on the computer. And yeah, I mean, yes, there would be kids who are gonna, like, I don't know, not pay attention, or yes. So you do want to have some multiple pathways. I do have to say about the NAT 3, for example, is that it is novel. The way it is set up is really unique and different. And that is one characteristic that you see, that a lot of gifted learners, they respond to something new, and that is a challenge, right? They want a challenge. They want to try new things. And so like that NAT 3 works pretty well. But yes, is it perfect for everybody? No. And that is why we do need some multiple, ways of approaching. So you do a screener, and there's some kids who, wow, amazing. And then there's a kiddo that the teacher is still saying, this child really is amazing. You need to take a different look. I know that they didn't score well on the NAT 3, but I just, like, look at this, look at this, look at this. Well, then that's where, that team can look at a student and say, we're going to move the student on for testing, even though their NAT score was, 49th percentile or something. Right.
Right. But just that you would add teachers knowing their kids and could advocate.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the
Oh,
recording, I think.
you know what? I should stop sharing. I forgot.